Yo, what's going on everybody? Shri Kanase here. So fraud orders, how do you deal with fraud orders? Now, one thing we can all agree on is nobody likes dealing with fraud orders for several reasons. Not only are fraud orders harmful for your business because they lead to high dispute rates, but they also take a lot of money from your pocket and make you just feel all stressed out and all kinds of emotions, because when you shipped out the order, you also invested money in actually buying the product, then maybe in the shipping cost of the product, and finally sending it out to the customer. So you did everything that you possibly could, but despite that, the order turned out to be fraud, and in the end, it actually ended up costing you money. The interesting thing to know about fraud orders is that banks often take the customer's side in such cases. And that's because when it is a fraud order, it is actually really hard for the bank to resolve the case in your favor, because even the slightest evidence in their favor could end up taking the case in their favor. So that's why it's really important to know exactly how to deal with these fraud orders so that you can actually focus on building a good business, whether it is drop shipping or an actual brand, and take away the attention from having to fill out the form to fight these fraud orders. But if this is the first time you're watching one of my Shopify videos, pause this video for literally 2 seconds and smash that like button down below and subscribe if you haven't already, but let's just jump right into it. So dealing with fraud orders, let's start off by talking about why should you even worry about fraud orders in the first place? What is the big deal about fraud orders? So let's start off by talking about the cons of fraud orders. How could they hurt your business? The first thing you have to understand is that whether it is a fraud order or a simple dispute regarding any other issue, the bank actually charges you a certain fee because of that dispute. And if the case is not found in your favor, meaning that you lose the case for the dispute, the bank takes a fee from you. And this fee can range from anywhere between $0 to $100. And that depends on which payment gateway that you use, which is why it is also important to use the correct payment gateway provider. But the chargeback fees are so expensive that not only are you having to lose the money with the cost of the product itself, but then you also have to pay the bank for that dispute. So in the end, you end up losing a lot more money unnecessarily. And this of course hurts your business because that means that's more profits gone from your pocket, which you could have kept to maybe reinvest in the business. So that's one of the biggest issues when it comes to dealing with these fraud orders. And again, oftentimes the bank actually sides with the customer, which is another issue because again, that leads to less money in your pocket. The second problem with fraud orders is that increases your dispute rate. And one thing you want to know about dispute rate is if your dispute rate goes above a 1%, the payment gateways actually start to keep a very, very close eye on you. It's kind of like a hawk looking down from the sky to find its prey, because at that point you're under the payment gateway's radar, and any small mistake or any increase in dispute could actually lead to you getting banned from that payment gateway. So again, that's going to just harm your business in the end because you won't have a payment gateway to use. And especially if you're in the process of scaling a product, not having a payment gateway will lead to a lot of more problems. So that's one additional reason as to why you want to avoid fraud orders as much as you can, because again, an increased dispute rate leads to just more and more problems down the line. The third biggest problem with fraud orders is brand reputation. Now, what do I mean by this exactly? Well, when a brand starts to face a lot of these fraud orders, their dispute rates go up. And if people start finding out that other customers are starting to dispute more and more of their orders, this is going to ruin your entire brand's reputation, because then you lose trustworthiness as a brand. And when you lose trustworthiness, people are not really that inclined to purchase from you. They would rather just Google the product that you're selling and buy from somebody else. So when your fraud rate increases, your dispute rate increases, and your brand reputation starts to decline, because then customers start complaining. And not every fraud dispute is going to be a fake, of course. There are often a lot of fraud disputes that may be real. But if people start telling other people about these disputes and how they're having issues dealing with your company, that's just bad brand reputation for you, and that just leads to more and more problems down the line. But in addition to that, the worst part is you're shipping out the product to the customer, and since the customer disputed the entire transaction, plus you now have to pay the chargeback fee, you also lost the amount of money that you invested in buying the product. And it could be a cheap product, maybe $5, $10, or it could be something more expensive in case you're dealing with high ticket products. And especially if you're dealing with high ticket products, the cost of goods actually adds up over time. So the losses become much, much bigger when dealing with these disputes, and these fraud orders. In addition to the cost of the goods itself, a lot of people also pay for the shipping cost of the product, or maybe they also pay for some kind of insurance in case you're an actual brand and you ship from your own warehouse. So that's an additional cost. And in addition to that, you're just losing profit overall dealing with these disputes and these fraud orders. And in the end, unfortunately, all of this leads to just an additional amount of stress, lost sleep, and an unprofitable business if you're not exactly sure how to deal with these fraud orders and how to prevent them in the first place. Of course, nobody likes dealing with stress. Nobody likes losing their sleep over such things. And of course, everybody wants a profitable business. So that's why it's so important for you to know exactly how to deal with these chargebacks and fraud orders so that you can focus more on building your business. But now that we've gone over the exact cons of having to deal with these fraud orders and how they can harm your business, let's talk about how you can actually deal with them in the first place. So what are the first things that you should be doing when it comes to dealing with fraud orders? The first thing that you want to actually do is enable something called the AVS check, which is known as the address verification system check, and the CVV check, also known as the card verification value check. The AVS check, if you haven't guessed by the name, actually is a special system which, if you use Shopify payments or Stripe or any other payment gateway, allows you to actually enable. And this is a setting which you can enable within your payment gateway. If you're not sure as to how to enable this, just go ahead and go to your payment provider and chat with the support team to ask them how to enable this. But this should definitely be enabled, because in my own experience, this has saved me a lot of money because it does a really good job of stopping those fraud orders from coming in. Basically, a lot of people who do these fraud orders or steal other people's credit cards fail the AVS check because sometimes they get the address incorrect. They're not exactly sure as to what the real address is of the credit card. And the AVS system does a really good job of making sure to stop those orders. In addition to the AVS system, the CVV system also does a great job of stopping these orders. Basically, what the CVV check does is it checks those special security code, sometimes the 3-digit or the 4-digit code on the back side of the card, and it makes sure that whoever is entering that specific credit card number has the CVV code correct. And if they fail to enter the correct number even once, the CVV check almost immediately bans them from using the card again. So that's one additional benefit to using the CVV check along with the AVS card check. These two are a must if you want to prevent fraud orders. But what you're going to notice is that even with these two things enabled, some fraud orders are still going to come through because these scammers are really smart. So what do you do in that case? Another thing that you should also be doing along with enabling these two systems is actually checking specific orders in your Shopify store and looking at the fraud analysis section. Now, if you're not sure exactly what the fraud analysis section is, I have my Shopify store opened up here, and this is one of the orders on my Shopify store. If you click on the specific order and go scroll all the way down, you'll see that on the right, there is a section called fraud analysis. It gives you different metrics to look at and different risk factors. So the first one is, of course, low. That means the order is low risk. You can ship it without any issues. Medium risk means that this order could possibly be a fraud order, so you should continue with caution. And I almost always never ship high risk orders because often they are fraud orders. Now, if you're not sure as to whether the order is fraud or not, if it's at medium or even at high, you want to look at the text that is right below the specific image right here. And it tells you a lot of important information. Right now, what it says is characteristics of this order are similar to non-fraudulent orders observed in the past, and there was only one payment attempt made. So that means the order is good to go. There's no real issue with this order. But you may be thinking, how do you know if an order is a high risk order, even if it's at a medium risk? So the specific metrics that I like to look at to determine that is basically these three ones right here. The first one is that the customer had to do multiple payment attempts in order to get the order to process. Now think about it. If the credit card is your credit card, what is the reason to have to enter the information multiple times? If a customer has to enter their credit card information more than 2 times, that is immediately an order I list as fraud and tell my supplier not to ship, because clearly it is a very highly likely chance of being a fraud order because they had to enter the credit card information which should be available to them right away multiple times. Another thing I like to look at is the billing address not matching. So in my case, I want my billing address of the customer to match the shipping address. But usually what happens is some people buy gifts for people who may not live with them. They may live far away. That's why this is the second thing I look at. But the third thing that I look at is that the shipping address is over 100 miles from the IP address. This is not always a case of a fraud order, but most of the times in my own experience, what I've noticed is if the specific order matches this, that means that that order is actually a high risk order and something that you do not want to fulfill. But again, unfortunately, even after going through all of this list, you're still going to see some fraud orders come through, and you're going to be dealing with some additional fraud orders. So the third thing I like to actually have on my Shopify store is some special fraud analysis apps. These fraud analysis apps are actually in addition to all of these other two things I mentioned, and they are the final factor in determining whether a specific order is a fraud order or not. And some of the apps which I've opened up over here are the following ones. So the first one is No Fraud Prevention. So as it says, this specific apps prevent fraud chargebacks and accepts more orders. So this is a great app to have if you're not really sure that you have done a good job of dealing with those fraud orders and you still think that more can come. So this app is a must-have on your Shopify store. There are some other ones available as well, such as this one, Fraud Block, which does the same thing as the first one. There's Fraud Killer as well. Signified is also another good one, which I recommend. But in reality, all of these apps do the same job. So I highly recommend that you choose one which fits your budget the most. But let's say you've done all of these things and you still have some fraud orders come through. What should you do in that case? Well, the last step for you is to, of course, basically provide as much information as you can to the credit card companies, which help the companies decide the case in your favor. And some of the important information which you can give to the credit card companies is the IP address and how many times the specific customer had to do payment to get it through, or whether the billing address matched the shipping address or not. These things are actually really important for the credit card company to determine whether the order is a good one or not. And what you're going to notice is that if all of these other metrics were matching, sometimes the credit card companies will actually resolve the case in your favor. And that's simply because not every fraud order is a real fraud order. Some people, unfortunately, don't have the best intentions in mind. They just want to buy the product and then just get a refund for the product because they don't want to waste their money. So in those cases, if you've done all of these three things and you provide all of the information in case the fraud order does come through, the credit card companies often do a good job of resolving the case in your favor. But in order to have that done, you're going to have to do all of these things. But again, as mentioned, you definitely want to avoid fraud orders as much as you can because they lead to a lot of issues long term that can just end up killing your business and ending your income streams. So if you want to prevent all of these things, make sure to do all of these things, not just one or two. Watch this video over and over if you're still not sure as to how to use all of these things to your advantage, but definitely make sure to have all of them running in your Shopify store. And in case those fraud orders do still come through, make sure to provide as much information as you possibly can. But if you found any type of value in this video, make sure to smash that like button down below and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys next time.